this rumor that Steve Harvey tried to get Bernie Mac's role on Ocean's 11,
right,
and even try to like undercut him in price and stuff like that. Do you know anything about the story?
It was weird to me because I was there the whole time. And one of the first things people say is, he knew you loved him. And I'm like, that's not really, how do you know that that's true if I didn't tell him?
At 62, D.L. Hughley finally broke his silence about footage the industry buried and truths they never wanted revealed about Bernie Mac's final years.
And I hear somebody come in my room and I go, who is that? Nigga, who is that? I like, nigga, who the is this in my room? Who the is in my room? I mean, you better get the out of my room. We both go to the door with pistols in our hand. It was me and Bernie.
The lies had been protected for 16 years, wrapped in grief and industry politics. But the real reason Bernie Mac died, isolated and betrayed, was about to be exposed. So let's get into it. Bernie Mac had committed the unforgivable sin in Hollywood. He believed his own worth. When the original Kings of Comedy tour launched in 1997, Bernie was supposed to be grateful for his spot in the middle of the lineup. Steve Harvey was the established star, the one with television credibility and radio reach. The hierarchy was clear, the roles were defined, and everyone was expected to stay in their lane.
You know, Steve at one point was, you know, uber successful, and then Bernie started to, because he didn't ever think he would get the opportunity he got.
But night after night, city after city, Bernie Mac was destroying that carefully constructed order. His raw authenticity cut through the polished performance of his colleagues like a blade through silk. When Bernie took the stage, audiences didn't just laugh, they felt something deeper. He wasn't performing comedy, he was revealing truth. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once. Bernie went from being grateful for any opportunity to understanding that he was the opportunity. Audiences came to see the Kings of Comedy, but they left talking about Bernie Mac. His stories about raising his sister's children, his battles with everyday absurdity, his unflinching observations about family and society struck audiences with devastating accuracy.
Once he did, America loved him, like we all kind of knew they would, and he decided to go a different way.
The closing spot in comedy isn't just about ego, it's about money, respect, and industry positioning. The comedian who closes is the star, the one the audience came to see, the one who gets the biggest check. When Bernie started demanding that spot, he wasn't just asking for recognition, he was threatening the entire power structure that kept black comedians in their assigned roles. D.L. Hughley watched this evolution with a mixture of admiration and growing concern. He understood what Bernie was up against because he had seen it before. The entertainment industry operated on a simple principle. Black talent could be successful, but only to the extent that success didn't threaten white control or established hierarchies. Bernie's emergence as the tour's breakout star created an impossible situation for everyone involved. How do you maintain tour billing when the supposed supporting act is generating the most excitement? How do you preserve industry relationships when natural talent disrupts carefully negotiated arrangements?
Oh, nobody ever tried to blow out somebody else's candle to make theirs burn bright. It was just cats that had natural affinity for each other.
The irony was crushing. The very authenticity that made Bernie Mac a star also made him a target. His refusal to tone down his truth-telling, his insistence on being treated as an equal rather than a grateful participant, his growing confidence in his own worth, all of these qualities that audiences loved were seen as dangerous defiance by industry executives. Behind the scenes, conversations were happening that Bernie wasn't part of. Television producers were calling about individual opportunities. Movie executives were discussing solo projects. The original Kings of Comedy had created a monster they couldn't control, a black comedian who knew his value and wasn't afraid to demand it. The pressure to keep Bernie in line came from multiple directions. Industry executives who had invested in the tour's existing hierarchy needed to protect their arrangements. Other comedians who depended on the established order for their own success couldn't afford to have Bernie disrupt the entire system. But Bernie Mac had tasted something more powerful than industry approval. He had experienced the pure connection between authentic performer and grateful audience. Once you understand that relationship, it becomes impossible to accept anything less than the respect that connection deserves. The entertainment industry's response to Bernie Mac's growing independence followed a playbook that had been perfected over decades of controlling black talent. If they couldn't keep him grateful, they would make him desperate. If they couldn't control his success, they would destroy his ability to enjoy it. The first weapon deployed was the oldest trick in Hollywood's arsenal: manufactured conflict. Suddenly, trade publications were running stories about creative differences and ego clashes within the Kings of Comedy group. Reporters who had never been backstage at a single show were suddenly experts on the comedian's personal relationships. D.L. Hughley found himself watching a masterclass in character assassination disguised as entertainment journalism. The same Bernie Mac who had been praised for his authenticity was now being criticized for his difficult personality. His confidence was reframed as arrogance. His demands for respect were portrayed as unreasonable diva behavior. The most insidious part of the campaign was how it used Bernie's very success against him. Every achievement became evidence of his alleged ego problem. Every demand for fair treatment was twisted into proof that he had become impossible to work with. The industry had learned that the most effective way to destroy a black performer was to make their reasonable expectations seem unreasonable.
There is this rumor that Steve Harvey tried to get Bernie Mac's role on Ocean's 11,
Right.
and even try to undercut him in price and stuff like that. Do you know anything about the story?
Behind the public relations war, more direct sabotage was taking place. The Ocean's 11 incident became the perfect symbol of how the industry operated. Whether Steve Harvey actually tried to undercut Bernie's price for the role didn't matter as much as what the rumor represented: the willingness of established stars to participate in the destruction of rising talent that threatened their position. Hughley began noticing patterns that extended far beyond simple competition. Opportunities that seemed perfect for Bernie would suddenly become unavailable. Television appearances would be rescheduled at the last minute. Movie roles would go to comedians with less experience but more industry compliance. Each incident could be explained away individually, but together they formed a clear picture of coordinated exclusion. The psychological warfare was relentless and sophisticated. Bernie found himself constantly defending his reputation against accusations that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The stress of fighting for opportunities while simultaneously battling character assassination began taking a toll that only those closest to him could see.
But never once did I see anything. When I read some of the things that people were alleging, it was weird to me because I was there the whole time.
The most devastating aspect of the campaign was how it isolated Bernie from potential allies. Other comedians who might have supported him were afraid to risk their own careers by associating with someone labeled as difficult. Industry executives who recognized his talent were reluctant to work with someone who came with alleged baggage. The isolation was psychological as much as professional. Bernie began questioning his own perceptions, wondering if his demands for respect were actually unreasonable. The constant gaslighting made him doubt the very instincts that had made him successful in the first place. What Hughley witnessed was a textbook example of how the entertainment industry maintains control over black talent. The system allowed for success, but only within carefully defined parameters. Step outside those boundaries, demand too much respect, insist on too much autonomy, and the machine would grind you down with methodical precision. The tragedy was that Bernie's only crime had been believing he deserved the same treatment afforded to white comedians with less talent and fewer accomplishments. But in an industry built on maintaining racial hierarchies, such beliefs were considered revolutionary acts that demanded punishment. By 2005, Bernie Mac was fighting battles on fronts he never saw coming. His diagnosis with sarcoidosis should have generated sympathy and industry support. Instead, it became another weapon in the campaign to destroy his career. D.L. Hughley watched in horror as Bernie's illness was systematically weaponized against him.
I remember I was at the golf course and we were getting ready to put it together and everybody was all excited. And so it was, you remember how the Lakers had Chris Paul for a second and then the next day they did, that's how it was.
The proposed Kings of Comedy reunion tour should have been Bernie's triumphant return. Hughley had been there when the plans were being discussed, watching everyone's excitement about reuniting the group for what could have been the biggest comedy tour in history. The financial projections were staggering, the audience demand was proven, and the timing seemed perfect. But Bernie Mac was no longer the grateful comedian willing to accept whatever role he was offered. His success with The Bernie Mac Show, his movie career, and his growing influence had given him leverage that made industry executives nervous. When he demanded equal creative control and fair financial terms for the reunion, the entire project suddenly became impossible to organize.
Bernie, felt like he didn't want to do it anymore. He was on his own path, and Steve. So, nothing like that ever happens or doesn't happen for a reason.
Hughley's public explanation was diplomatic, but the reality was far more sinister. Bernie hadn't simply chosen to go his own way. He had been systematically excluded from the decision-making process that would have made the tour successful. When he refused to accept secondary status in a group where he had become the primary draw, the entire project collapsed. The pattern was consistent with everything else that had happened to Bernie throughout his career. Opportunities would appear, generate excitement, and then evaporate as soon as Bernie insisted on being treated as an equal partner rather than a grateful participant. The industry had perfected the art of making someone's reasonable demands appear unreasonable. During this period, Bernie's health problems were being used against him in ways that violated every principle of human decency. Producers would cite his unreliability when passing him over for projects, despite his consistent professional record. Insurance companies made filming prohibitively expensive, creating additional barriers to his employment.
So I was disappointed, but I understood that, those kind of things happen. And I just, got the memory of being with cats that I loved and making history.
The stress of fighting both disease and industry blacklisting created a vicious cycle that was devastating to witness. Bernie's health problems made him more vulnerable to the emotional toll of professional rejection, while the constant battle for respect and fair treatment exacerbated his physical condition. Hughley watched his friend being ground down by forces completely outside his control. The most heartbreaking aspect was watching Bernie's relationships with his fellow kings deteriorate under the pressure. The brotherhood that had seemed so genuine during their peak years was being torn apart by industry politics and competitive pressures that none of them had fully anticipated. The false alarm about Bernie's death, weeks before the real call came, revealed how isolated he had become. Rumors about his condition were circulating in industry circles, creating an atmosphere where his actual death almost seemed anticlimactic when it finally occurred. The machine had been preparing for his absence long before his body gave out. Bernie Mac died on August 9, 2008, officially from complications related to pneumonia during treatment for sarcoidosis. But those who had watched his final years knew the truth. He had been killed as much by systematic industry mistreatment as by any medical condition. The immune system that failed him was both biological and professional. The moment Bernie Mac's death was announced, a carefully orchestrated campaign began to rewrite the history of his final years. D.L. Hughley watched in real time as the same industry that had systematically destroyed his friend's career suddenly became the primary custodian of his legacy.
And one of the first things people say is, he knew you loved him. And I'm like, that's not really, how do you know that that's true if I didn't tell them?
The transformation was immediate and shameless. Industry executives who had spent years making Bernie's life miserable were suddenly quoted in trade publications celebrating his irreplaceable talent and lasting impact on comedy. The same people who had weaponized his illness against him were now expressing their deep sorrow at his passing. Most disturbingly, the narrative around the original kings of comedy was completely sanitized. The tensions, power struggles, and systematic exclusion that had defined Bernie's final years were erased from the official story. Instead, the group was portrayed as a loving brotherhood of comedians who had supported each other throughout their careers.
It just seemed out of sync with what I experienced on the Kings of Comedy. So I never saw them do anything like that.
Hughley found himself trapped between truth and diplomacy. Speaking honestly about what he had witnessed would be seen as disrespectful to Bernie's memory and potentially damaging to the careers of his surviving friends. But staying silent meant allowing a false narrative to become the accepted truth about one of comedy's most talented and mistreated performers. The pressure to maintain the sanitized version came from multiple directions. Television producers wanted feel-good reunion specials, not uncomfortable examinations of industry racism and power dynamics. Comedy fans preferred to remember the Kings as a celebration of Black excellence, rather than a cautionary tale about the limits of that celebration. Bernie's family, grieving and vulnerable, needed protection from having their loved one's legacy become a battleground for industry politics. Hughley understood that the full truth about Bernie's mistreatment could wait until the immediate pain of loss had subsided.
That tour, and we were all proud of each other and supportive of each other and happy to have been a part of it.
But the cover-up went far deeper than grief protection. The industry had a vested interest in preventing any serious examination of how Bernie Mac had been treated because it would expose similar patterns affecting other Black entertainers. The systematic mistreatment wasn't unique to Bernie. It was standard operating procedure for managing Black talent that got too successful or too independent. Documentation of the real story was systematically suppressed. Behind-the-scenes footage that showed the actual dynamics between the comedians was locked away in studio vaults. Contracts and correspondence that revealed the discriminatory nature of Bernie's treatment were sealed under confidentiality agreements that would never expire. Interview footage that contained uncomfortable truths was edited heavily or shelved entirely. The industry created an alternative history where Bernie Mac had been universally loved and supported throughout his career, dying peacefully as a respected member of the comedy community.
And we were all proud of each other and supportive of each other and happy to have been a part of it.
The sanitized legacy served multiple purposes beyond protecting reputations. It maintained the industry's ability to continue the same patterns with other performers. If Bernie Mac's story became a cautionary tale about the cost of demanding respect, it might inspire other Black entertainers to fight back against mistreatment. Most tragically, the cover-up robbed Bernie of the one thing he had fought for throughout his entire career: recognition of his true worth and acknowledgement of the respect he deserved. Even in death, he was being managed and controlled by an industry that had never learned to value authenticity over compliance. Years later, when comedians like Cat Williams began speaking out about similar patterns of mistreatment, Hughley would recognize the courage required to challenge these sanitized narratives. But by then, the false version of Bernie Mac's story had become so entrenched that the truth seemed almost impossible to believe. D.L. Hughley's awakening to the systematic nature of industry mistreatment didn't happen overnight. It came through his own battles, starting with the explosive feud with Monique that revealed how quickly loyalty could turn to warfare in the entertainment business. The 2022 Detroit comedy show contract dispute became a public bloodbath that exposed the same patterns that had destroyed Bernie Mac. The setup seemed simple enough. Two established comedians sharing a stage at Detroit's Fox Theater. But when Monique discovered that the billing had been changed to put Hughley in the closing spot, she erupted with a fury that caught everyone off guard. What should have been a routine contract negotiation became a full-scale war.
Bitch nigga, I feel sorry for D.L. Hughley's family. I feel sorry for his fucking wife, because how do you suck the dick of a coward?
Monique's accusations cut deeper than professional disagreements. She attacked Hughley's credibility as a man, bringing up his daughter's assault and suggesting he hadn't believed the victim initially.
How I let a man touch my child, which nothing could be further from the truth. They were both 13 years old. They were friends that had grown up together. And this is something I lament to this day. Denied that I said, well, you know, that's what kids do. And I will never forgive myself for not, A, believing her.
Hughley's response showed he had learned from watching Bernie Mac's destruction. Instead of backing down or trying to smooth things over, he fought back with documentation. He released contracts, schedules, and correspondence that proved his version of events. But the damage was already done. The Whisper campaign had begun. The Monique situation revealed patterns Hughley recognized from Bernie's experience. A successful black performer demands respect and fair treatment. Industry allies turn against them. Personal attacks are deployed to destroy credibility. The performer is isolated and labeled as difficult until opportunities disappear. But Hughley also saw differences that gave him hope. Social media had changed the game, allowing performers to speak directly to audiences without industry gatekeepers controlling the narrative. The same platforms that amplified attacks also provided space for defense and counterattack. The feud exposed something else: how quickly the industry could turn someone from insider to outsider. Hughley had been a respected veteran comedian with decades of success, but one conflict with another established performer was enough to make him radioactive to certain segments of the business. The personal cost was devastating. Relationships he had built over decades suddenly became complicated. Industry events he had been welcomed at for years now came with whispered conversations and careful distance. The same isolation that had destroyed Bernie was being deployed against him, but Hughley had advantages Bernie never possessed. His radio show gave him a daily platform to control his own narrative. His decades of experience had taught him how the machine operated. Most importantly, he had watched his friend be destroyed by staying silent, and he was determined not to make the same mistake.
I'm a solid dude. My family loves me, despite all the horrible I've done. I'm as solid as they come. Can you say the same? I ain't gotta sue people or call people out. I ain't gotta argue. I just be the I am and do what I do.
The Monique War became a case study in how industry conflicts were weaponized against black performers. Both comedians suffered professional consequences that went far beyond their actual dispute. The industry used their conflict to justify excluding both from opportunities, claiming they were too risky to work with. Hughley's decision to become politically outspoken transformed him from entertainer to target. His 2024 Democratic National Convention appearance, where he publicly apologized to Kamala Harris for past criticisms, marked a point of no return in his relationship with certain segments of both the industry and his audience.
People, I believe that your apology should be as loud as your accusation, and I'm here apologizing in front of the whole damn world.
The apology itself became controversial. Hughley admitted he had attacked Harris's record as a prosecutor without doing proper research, influenced by misinformation that painted her as anti-black. Standing before thousands at the DNC, he acknowledged spreading false narratives and committed to supporting her presidential campaign. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Critics accused him of being paid to change his position, suggesting his apology was financially motivated rather than genuine. Social media exploded with allegations that Democratic operatives had bought his endorsement, turning his moment of accountability into evidence of corruption. The industry response revealed how political positioning could destroy careers as effectively as personal conflicts. Opportunities began drying up in markets where Hughley's politics were seen as liability. Venues canceled bookings, citing security concerns or audience pushback. The same patterns that had isolated Bernie Mac were being deployed for political rather than professional reasons. But Hughley also discovered unexpected support from audiences who appreciated his willingness to speak truth to power. His radio show grew in influence even as traditional opportunities disappeared. The same authenticity that made him controversial with industry executives resonated with listeners who were tired of sanitized celebrity voices. The pattern was familiar from Bernie Mac's experience, but with crucial differences. Where Bernie had been isolated and forced to fight alone, Hughley built alliances with other performers who had faced similar retaliation. Where Bernie had relied on traditional industry channels, Hughley developed direct relationships with audiences through social media and radio. The political targeting revealed how the entertainment industry's control mechanisms had evolved since Bernie's time. Instead of crude blacklisting, they used market pressures and security concerns to achieve the same result. Instead of direct confrontation, they used whisper campaigns and selective opportunity denial. At 62, D.L. Hughley had accumulated enough scars and wisdom to understand the full scope of what had destroyed his friend, Bernie Mac. His decision to finally speak truth about the buried footage and industry cover-up came from a place of pain that had fermented into righteous anger over 16 years. The revelation wasn't just about Bernie Mac. It was about exposing a systematic approach to controlling black talent that continued to operate with impunity. Hughley had watched the same patterns destroy careers across generations, from Bernie's era through the present day. The techniques had evolved, but the underlying purpose remained unchanged. The footage they had tried to bury was finally seeing light, and with it, the real story of systematic mistreatment that continued to shape careers and destroy lives in the entertainment industry. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.